You don't know flag. You don't know flag.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flag, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flag.
Episode 112. Photon.
Welcome, Photon Warriors. Commence strategic maneuvers at audible command signal. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, begin.
Yes, indeed. Greetings, Photon Warriors, and welcome to episode 112 of You Don't Know Flack. If you didn't guess by the introduction there, today's theme is Photon, the ultimate game on planet Earth, as it was known. To a bunch of kids like me, it really did seem like the ultimate game on planet Earth. At the time, when I was playing Photon, it was being pitched as the sport of the future. Competition, laser tag. There were competitions across the country. It was considered a sport. And Photon had huge success in the mid-'80s for several years, 4 or 5 years, and then the company filed bankruptcy and pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth. So today I'm going to be talking about Photon and my experiences with Photon and all about Photon. So let's go ahead and get started with Photon. I want to say Photon 8 more times before we start. Episode 112, You Don't Know Flat. When I think back about my time spent at Photon, there's almost this, if you can imagine like movies, maybe movies from the 80s that you saw of kids hanging out, or maybe you were a kid who hung out at the mall with his friends, not shopping, not doing anything particularly constructive, just being at the mall. There was also a time, where skateboarding in the 80s was very popular, and kids just hung out, at skate spots. Maybe they wore skater-type clothing, and they weren't necessarily skateboarding, but they were just with those people, And to me, when I think about Photon, that's kind of what I think about. It was more than just the game, the actual playing of Photon. It was an entire culture. I don't know if you could say a lifestyle, but it was, there was more than just playing in the game Photon. There was hanging out at the Photon Center, being with other people, talking about strategy. When it hit, it became very popular in a short amount of time, and people, a lot of people really connected with this game of laser tag in an arena. So the history of Photon can be traced back to one man. His name is George Carter III. And according to George, he got the idea for Photon while he was watching Star Wars in these, the laser battles that took place on the Death Star. And he had this idea that that could become a fun game. One of the things that George has mentioned in interviews is that really it takes the guesswork out of playing cops and robbers, where people would you point your finger at another kid and say, well, bang, I got you. Well, no, you didn't. Yes, you did. That sort of thing. But so the technology that went into Photon was basically that game that a lot of us played as kids, except for it kept score for us, and, so now there was no arguing with the system. Of course, people still did argue with the system, but basically it was able to keep track of score and who shot who, and so forth. So George came up with this idea for Photon way back in 1977 when he first saw Star Wars, but he didn't really start working on Photon until about 1982. And so he applied for some patents and, set up the technology that Photon would run on. And the first Photon Center opened in March of 1984. So that was the very first Photon Center. And then shortly after opening that, George franchised the ability to open your own Photon Center. Now, there were a couple of specific arenas, maps, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the first franchisee, according to Wikipedia anyway, opened in Toronto in the summer of 1985. And it wasn't too long after that Photon opened here in Oklahoma City. Now, again, this is from Wikipedia. It says in 1987, 70 franchise licenses had been sold and 45 arenas were operating. So there were operating arenas in both Oklahoma City and Tulsa at that time. So we had 2 of the 45 Photon centers. So Photon was big here at that time, but not necessarily, all across the country. So let's talk a little bit about the game of Photon. The goal of Photon was obviously for your team to score more points than the other team during a set amount or during a single game. Games were 6.5 minutes long, and they were played on a big play field, which was actually symmetrical. So, there were 2 sides to the play field, and your side matched the other side. The equipment that you wore, there was a red team and a green team, and the helmets for your team matched your color. Also, there were lights on your helmet that had that same color. So it was kind of dark inside the Photon Center, but that's how you could spot the people on your team versus people on the other team. So this arena, there were a couple of different layouts for Photon arenas, and the 2 that I'm familiar with were the Alpha and the Omega. Oklahoma City was an Alpha field, and so there were all these different parts of the field that you could go to. In the middle, there was a big bunker. There were a series of catacombs, a big maze kind of on the bottom. In the back, there were ramps that shot up near the front where you began. And so there were all these, depending on what kind of player you were. If you were somebody who liked to hide in a bunker and snipe people as they ran by, or if you were someone who wanted to take, the crow's nest was a big center area at the top center of the field, which was great for shooting down at people, but it left you kind of vulnerable when people came up behind you. So there was a lot of coordination on your team. Actually, there was as much coordination as you wanted because there were some people that didn't want to be part of a team or anything, and they would just walk around and shoot people and get shot, and that was okay. And then there were people that were, took it almost to a military level. This was before the big surgence of paintball as we have it today. So there were a lot of people that were military minded who would play Photon and set up very specific plans, and people that would even either synchronize their watches or based on cues on the game soundtrack. If you listen, there's a soundtrack that played with each game, and there were different cues in that, so you could maybe whenever an event happened on the soundtrack move to another area or something like that. But anyway, there were also fog machines that sprayed fog into the field, and laser lights that shot around spotlights when the intruder alert happened. So there were all these things that were meant to kind of give you this otherly world, like you were on another planet in the environment. And then everything was covered in this kind of indoor-outdoor gray carpet, which was really great for giving you carpet burns if you ever fell down. So everybody had photon rug burns. That was very, very common when playing. So anyway, when you began the game, you had the red team on one side, the green team on the other, and the introduction that I played at the beginning of the podcast was what began the actual soundtrack of the game. So the lady would count down from 5 to 1, say begin, and then you would walk out onto the field. Now, different Photon centers, the general rule of Photon was you were not supposed to run, but depending on the age of the players and what was going on at the time, that rule kind of came and went. I remember running an awful lot while playing Photon, but I think officially you weren't supposed to run. So as you spread out on the field, you began looking for people on the other team. You could shoot them, they could shoot you. You got 10 points for shooting someone else, and you lost 10 points if they shot you. Now, you could also lose 30 points if you shot someone on your own team. And actually, if you did that, that would disrupt both of you. You couldn't shoot for another 5 seconds. So it may have been, I think it was 5 seconds, 5 or 7 seconds. I think it was 5 seconds. So if you got shot or shot someone on your own team, you wouldn't be able to shoot for another 5 seconds. There were also these sounds, and I have some of these sounds that I've downloaded off the internet that were going on in your helmet at the time, so you could really hear what was going on in the game. Now, on each side of the field, there was also a base, and it was this giant pulsating LED dome. There's one on each side of the playfield, and it was colored for your color. So, red team had a red base, green team had a green base. And if you could get to the other side of the field and shoot your opponent's base 3 times in a row without anything else happening, then you got 200 points. Now, you could only do that once per game. And you had to shoot it 3 times in a row uninterrupted. In other words, if you shot it twice and then someone else shot you, then those 2 shots didn't count. You'd have to shoot the base 3 times again. But the base was also good as a target for clearing your gun. Another rule that the computer system kept track of is that you could only shoot the same player 3 times in a row, and then you had to shoot something else. Whether that was another opponent would be the ideal situation, but also you could clear off the base and shoot the base and then shoot the same person. So this prevented you from following little kids around and just shooting them repeatedly and running up a big score for you and making their day pretty miserable too. So but that was kind of how the scoring worked. And then, so at the end of the game, when you went out, there were televisions that were hanging up, and it would show you your individual score plus a team score, where it would have all the scores of each side added up. So that was the ideal goal. Now, Photon involved a lot of equipment as well, and so when you got in line to play, you would go through this like a kind of a chained off thing. Depending on how many people there, they would add, like you were waiting in line at an amusement park. But so the first thing you did when you went in is you would get this little like a disposable do-rag that we all called space lice protectors, and that's basically what it was for, was to put these things on so that when you put on these helmets that everybody else was wearing, they wouldn't be all sweaty or that you would get head lice or something like that. So you put on your space lice protector, and then you would go, they would divide you up, green team or red team, and you would go put on your equipment. So the first thing you did was pick up the battery pack, which you fastened around your waist. And then you put the pod, the chest pod, there was a strap that went over your neck. You put that on, and connected to the chest pod was both your helmet and your laser gun. All these things together weighed about 23 pounds. So if you can imagine these 6.5 minute games running, with 23 pounds of equipment, it wasn't always fun, but it was kind of cumbersome and clunky to run around, but it was still very exciting, and again, that also added to that kind of atmosphere, like you were going, to another planet, like you were in, space. Your pod plugged into the battery pack that was around your waist, and there was should have been a little elastic strap to hold that in place, but not all of, those straps sometimes broke. But you had that, and then once you were all suited up, you went at the end of the hallway, and there was a person there with that was working like a computer deck, and you had to present your Photon ID card, which went into the system, and you put your gun in, and then you would give them whatever name you were. Of course, I was always Flack, but or Jack Flack. But, and there was it wasn't tied to your card, so you could give them whatever funny name you wanted, to the person's discretion who was typing it in, obviously. But so you gave them a name, and they would program that into the system, and then it would activate your pod, and the sound inside your helmet would change. So that's how you knew you were into the game. So, there's these audio signals. So if you're not, connected to the system, then you would know it. So then once you were suited up and you were connected to the system, you went to one of 2 little waiting rooms, and that's where, your team would kind of assemble, and you hung out there until everybody was decked into the game. So this might give you a couple of minutes, to come up with some strategy, saying, okay, you 2 guys are going to go here, you're going to go here. Fred and I will hang out at the base and shoot other people, and then, in 3 minutes, you come back and relieve us, and we'll go over and try to shoot the other guy's base. So, I mean, our plans were pretty crude at the time. A lot of the time the plan was, hey, let's go run around and shoot people. So it wasn't a great, an advanced plan, but it was a plan. So eventually we were all led out onto the field, and like I said, the thing that you heard at the beginning of the podcast was the beginning of the soundtrack, which was 6.5 minutes. Trivia fact, the soundtrack was actually recorded by Fleetwood Mac. So a lot of the space, type music, there were different soundtracks. They were all really similar, and they were all the same length of time, but some had more music in them, some had less. But I'm going to, near the end of the podcast, I'll probably put on the entire soundtrack. I have some different things I want to play for you, but the game began, and you, like I said, you would set out. There were a couple of different rules and that were enforced. There was a referee, I guess you would say, that would walk the floor, sometimes two, usually just one. And they would enforce rules as they saw them, but a lot of times the rules were enforced by players as well. So, the regular guys that were there, if you were doing something wrong, they would let you know. But the first rule was no running, which was broken every game. But if a referee saw you, they would say no running. But, especially at the beginning of the game, to get to some of the high profile, the best, strategic areas, like the crow's nest up at the top, if you weren't running, you weren't going to get there first. So the second rule was called the 5-foot rule. And what that rule was is that you were not supposed to be within 5 foot of another player. If you were within 5 foot of another player, you were not supposed to shoot them. And it was supposed to be 5 foot, I guess, phaser to phaser. So if you, were pointing your gun at someone else and they were pointing theirs, I mean, if you were 5 foot away but you were both pointing, that wasn't really cool. So it wasn't supposed to be hand-to-hand combat. It was, firing fake laser guns at each other. And occasionally there were parts of the maze where you would run into somebody, like if you were in that, there was a back hallway that ran the whole length of the arena. And so you would come around the corner and be moving down there, and all of a sudden somebody would come out on the other team. And so the sportsman-like thing to do would be to hold your gun up, point it towards the sky, and say pass, and then the other person would say pass. And then there was this ritual that would always happen where you would pass, wait until you were 5 foot away from the other person, and then start trying to shoot them immediately as fast as you could, But you weren't supposed to shoot within 5 foot of each other, and it was called the 5-foot rule. Now, an experienced player, if you were holding your gun in their face or whatever, someone who's been there might knock the gun out of your hand or smack your gun with their gun and yell 5-foot rule. So that was one of those things that was enforced by players as much as it was by referees. And then the other rule, which kind of goes without saying, but pretty much the ultimate bad sportsman thing that you could do was unplug yourself in the middle of a game, which the computer system saw that as basically an equipment malfunction and took you out of the game. So if you were losing or doing really poorly, some people who were bad sports would just unplug their pod from their battery pack, and then that would be the end of it. But a lot of times people who did that were asked to sit out from future games or have a timeout, So that was really frowned upon. In the beginning of playing Photon, my friends and I didn't have much of a strategy. Actually, when I say friends, it's my buddy Jeff. He was my co-Photon Warrior, if you will. He and I would go to Photon and stay as long as we could and play and hang out. But over time, we all developed techniques and styles that would help you. For example, when you were shooting your opponent, you could shoot them in the chest, or you could shoot them in any of the LEDs. Basically, there were sensors all over the helmet. So one thing you could do to help prevent being shot was stand with your chest up against a wall and then shoot sideways. So now your chest can't be hit. And then to make this, to take that one step further, you could lean your head way back. So now the person that's trying to shoot you, really they can see the bottom of your chin and your neck, but they're having a hard time seeing your actual helmet, which is what they would have to shoot, or your chest pod, which is up against the wall, Then there was another move, it was called a head fake or a head tilt or whatever, but or a head bob maybe, but it was really the act of violently shaking your head whenever someone was about to shoot you. So it might be like like if you were twisting away from a person really quickly and then twisting back and looking at them, or spinning around, that type of thing. Really, it looked like you might be having a seizure or that something was physically wrong with you. But a lot of times it would keep someone else's gun from registering on your helmet. So, the longer you played, the more of these little types of tricks that you would learn to help you, boost your score a little bit. Now, Photon wasn't cheap, or at least it didn't seem to me to be cheap as a kid. Looking back now, I think it was pretty affordable. But first off, you had to get a membership pass, which was good for a year, and it cost $30. So you had that price right up front. And that was a photo ID that had your face on it that you had to scan to play every game. Then you had your games, which were 6.5 minutes long, and they cost $3. So if you went to a Photon and played 3 games, you're out about $10. That's assuming that you already have a pass. Now, our Photon and many Photons across the country started implementing passes where you could play as many games as you want for a single day. Ours was called the Zappy Pass, and it was $20, and you could play all day. So Jeff and I would go, and our Photon was open for 15 hours. It was on Saturday. It opened at 10 a.m., and it went all day and closed at just after midnight at 1 a.m. So we would pay $20 and then play literally for 15 hours. I mean, you would play a 6-minute game, get out of the arena, and immediately go get in line. And if they were busy, it took about 3 minutes to get ready. So they ran a game about every 10 minutes. 6.5 minute game, and then 3.5 minutes to get ready for the next one. So if they weren't busy, and you could hold a maximum of, I think, 10 players per side. So if there were less than 20 people playing, you could literally play every game, one game every 10 minutes. I remember going outside and sitting down and crying because my calves and my legs or ankles would be cramping so bad from, running for 6, 7, 8 hours basically with all this equipment, But we definitely, we got our money's worth with the Zappy Pass. So yeah, we did that quite a bit, and actually that kind of leads me into just hanging out at Photon. It was this subculture of Photon Warriors, if you will. We didn't wear. There were a few people that would wear camouflage, but I think the real guys mostly wore black. I mean, that was, you wanted to hide, in the darkness of the Photon maze or whatever. I mean, I don't know how much you could really hide wearing a helmet with LEDs all over it, but you didn't want to wear, bright colors. And, like I said, there were some guys that, with the military background, or guys that were, kids that were playing Army that wanted to come play this, they wore camouflage. But most of us wore black, preferably shorts, which was cooler if you were playing a long time because it sure got hot in the Photon arena. But also, it was kind of a trade-off because you also ended up, there was no doubt you were going to go home with carpet burns from falling or rubbing up against something or whatever. But there was the downtime outside when you weren't playing of just hanging out, at this Photon Center. Some of that time would be spent making plans, talking about strategy, talking with other people. But sometimes it was just hanging out. It was a bunch of kids and teens and young adults who were all into this whole culture of laser tag, So it was kind of a neat deal. Now, other things at the Photon Center, there wasn't a lot to do other than play Photon, but most Photon Centers had arcade games. I remember ours had, specifically, I remember Discs of Tron, Asteroids, Space Invaders. I'm pretty sure there was a Pac-Man. So a lot of common arcade games at the time. And then upstairs was an observation deck. And it ran the length of the center on one side, and then there was a part that went out towards the middle. And so from this observation deck, you could go upstairs and watch the entire game looking down at the playfield. And actually, you were eye level with the second level of the playfield. So as people came up to the crow's nest or on some of those top ramps, you would actually be equal to them. There was also I guess you'd call it a shooting gallery type game that you could play. I think it was $1 or so. And there were guns set up on the observation deck. So when people were playing Photon, you could go to the observation deck and pay $1 and shoot the actual players, like a shooting gallery, and try to get a high score. Now, your shooting did not affect the people in the game. In other words, when you shot them, they didn't get de-rezzed or anything like that. But it was just kind of a side thing. I remember, I think my mom may have done that a couple times while she was waiting, for us to get done playing Photon. So anyway, there was also the snack bar. It was called something like the lunar snack bar or something. I remember a big, huge mural on the wall of the picture of the Earth sunrise coming over the lunar landscape, from the moon's point of view. But it was just a regular old snack bar. It had hot dogs and frozen pizzas and nachos, and there were many, many times where I ate 3 meals at that snack bar. Come in, play a few games of Photon, have some lunch, play games, have dinner there, play games, have something at midnight, and then go home, So I spent a lot of time in the snack bar. Now, as far as the games went, most of the time it was just what I guess you would call regular play, like free play or whatever, and anybody was allowed to play. But there were certain nights where they had league play, just like a bowling league or something, where actual teams who had signed up could come in and play against one another. And then there were also sanctioned games, and they would have these fairly regularly, but these were like officially sanctioned games from Photon. And then there was things you could earn. If you scored 750 points in a sanctioned game, then I don't know what you would call it, you gained a title of Sir. And so whenever you played a game, they would put Sir in front of your name. And of course there were, I remember Sir Psycho and I think there was a Sir Lizard King, I don't know. And then there were funny ones. I remember a Sir Colquet and Circumcised. So there were those guys. But and then if you scored 1,000 points at a sanctioned game, you had Lord put in front of your name. So I don't know that there was any official other than bragging rights to be able to do that, and I was never able to do it. But the neat thing about it was, it would strike fear in people. I mean, you would sign up for Photon and look at the score thing, and if you had a Sir on the other team or a Lord somebody, basically you knew you were about to get pummeled. One thing I wanted to talk about just briefly was the equipment that was used and how often it failed. It wasn't all the time, but I mentioned that sometimes your power cable would come unplugged from your pod. When that happened, you were out of the game. It just reset you, Then there were times where the main computer system at Photon would simply lock up. And I have read that Photon ran off of an IBM XT, and the guns broadcasted wirelessly at 600 baud to this machine. And so when this thing would lock up, Photon might be down for half an hour. And especially what would be bad, sometimes this would happen after you'd already suited up. So now you'd have to just, stand in the waiting area for half an hour as, wearing this 25 pounds of gear while they were trying to reboot the system and get everything reconnected, So that was kind of a bummer. It's really amazing looking back at it, actually, how much they were able to do with this kind of technology at the time. We're talking mid-'80s here. So, like I said, this is 85, 86 for our Photon Center. I have an article here that I found on the internet. This was written by Mark Maxham, Maxham, who apparently had some insight with let's see, this is taken information from a technician who was employed at the original Photon in Dallas. And anyway, I just wanted to read this bit. It says, the Photon helmet and chest pod are covered with infrared light-emitting diodes. These diodes blink out at 600 bits per second, 8-bit code, your individual ID number. So when you shoot someone, a phototransistor in your gun scans their code. It's like a modem that uses light instead of sound, and in fact the transmitter-receiver circuit uses an off-the-shelf modem encoder-decoder chip. Basically true for the old Photon system. Most arenas, however, eventually upgraded to using 1200 baud. That sometimes made it harder to dodge. It has been argued that this was a bad move since it made it really easy to hit people, especially since the phaser boards were upgraded at that time also. I've actually found it more interesting to play with the old-style manual tuning at 1200 baud, since shots were a bit more challenging, though dodging was still a bit harder. And when you went and played a game with one of the normal newer phaser boards, well, you had an unfair advantage of being a really good shot, unless you got used to the easier-to-hit boards. The 600-1200 baud signal is further modulated at 38.4 kHz. The gun's circuitry is tuned to only recognize this high-frequency carrier. This is so the gun does not react to body heat or light bulbs. A strong IR source will saturate the transistor, though, which is why the gun works best in the dark. So, see, these are things that, had I known, maybe there were ways that you could have cheated, at Photon. Maybe kind of like a radar detector or jammer, maybe there would have been a thing. The game system consisted of 2 True Blue IBM XTs connected via serial lines. The Game Master talked to the Data Master, which was really just an extra storage device that was used to generate daily, weekly, monthly pod and master radio performance. The whole system uses only one frequency, so the pods perform time sharing once per second. The master sends out a pulse sync. Each pod then waits a certain amount of time, depending on its ID, and then gets its own 1 byte long time slot in which to communicate with the master. If you have shot someone, you transmit their ID number. If something has happened to you, most notably being shot, you receive some sort of signal indicating what has happened. So, like I said, this is pretty advanced stuff for the time, and so with all this going on, like I said, during this the heat of the battle or whatever, you were constantly being updated about what's going on by the sounds in your helmet. And so I'm going to play you a few sounds here real quick. Let me pull this up. So this first sound here is of you getting hit, which is something I was very familiar with. So that's what it sounded like in your helmet when you got hit. And then this is the sound that it played whenever you shot someone else. And this is what it sounded like when you shot someone on your own team. I was also very familiar with that one. Then here's the sound of a miss shot. And finally the sound of a reset. And this is basically the sound that it played if you weren't, decked into the game. Now, at the beginning of the podcast, if you remember, I played the beginning of the Photon soundtrack, and I'll go ahead and put that in here again. And I'll just turn it down so I can talk over it here a little bit. So this is a 6.5 minute audio track that played during every single game, and I found this on the internet. There's actually about 8 different tracks, which I didn't realize this at the time. And they're all 6.5 minutes, and they're all very similar, but they may have different sound effects here or there. But one thing that they all have is the intruder alert. And the intruder alert was, it happened twice a game. And it didn't really affect the gameplay per se, but what happened was when the intruder alert went off, the lights would dim even more so, and spotlights would come on, and she would announce there was an intruder alert, and you would hear lasers firing off and things, and it was almost like a panic, type of thing. Like, it was kind of stressful. Like I said, it didn't affect you, but the intruder alerts were a good way to time how long, how far you were into the game. So it was easy, an easy audio landmark, if you will, to tell someone, okay, after the first intruder alert, quit what you're doing, I'll meet you at the crow's nest, and then after the second intruder alert, let's go for the base or whatever. So here's the intruder alert.
Intruder alert. Intruder alert. 5 seconds and counting to overhead attack. Assume protective cover.
And then for a short period of time, the lights would stay dim, and so yeah, it was kind of a little fun thing, that happened in the middle of the game. I guess while I'm playing some audio here, I want to talk about some of the Photon marketing that took place. Now, remember, this is a really short window of time. The first Photon Center opens in Dallas in 84. In 85, franchises are showing up. So this is 85 and early 86. Photon launches a fan club, which I cannot believe that I wasn't a member of. I don't think I knew about the fan club at the time, but they did have a fan club. There were also half a dozen Photon books, which were novels that took place, on Planet Photon or whatever. And then there was the television show, which is globally panned as being a horrible, horrible type show. I remember watching this show just a couple of times and just remember, this is like, to put it in comparison, like the Star Wars fan that I am today. I have thousands and thousands of dollars of Star Wars toys boxed up on display. All over my house I have Star Wars stuff. And this would be like a Star Wars show that came out when Star Wars was at its biggest, and me deciding it's so bad that I couldn't watch it. It was literally like that. When Photon came out, it was huge, and it was just, really we felt like we were kids, moving into something that was going to be big in the future, like this huge thing, like, there would be Photon in the Olympics or something, something like that. But it felt like, when I was 30, I would still be playing Photon and taking my kids to Photon and doing all this. And the Photon show, when it came on, it was so terrible. It was like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and some of those shows at the time that actually had foreign footage that was overdubbed and mixed in. The whole show was done basically on a green screen, and there was one guy that was a Photon Warrior, and then a bunch of idiots in costumes that were aliens, and some were good guys and bad guys, and it was just so awful. If you want to see an episode, there's some clips available on YouTube, and I've got one of them here. I'm just going to play a few seconds of this because it's really bad. But here's just a small clip from the Photon television show.
Nice work, my little friend.
Thanks, Percival.
Look, behind you. It's Mandor, and he's got Bodhi.
Mandar.
He's a pathetic specimen, isn't he? There's only one thing to do with this loser. Let's destroy him. So long.
It sure is fun watching someone who enjoys their work as much as you do.
This little worm will never bother us again.
Guys.
You'll pay for that, girlie.
No time like the present, boy.
No, Tibia, let me handle him.
He's mine. How do you like it so far, boy? It's been fun, Mandor.
So much for Mandar. Now where's his beetle-faced buddy?
Hey, you're good. Hey, there he is over there. He's getting away. Hurry.
And really, maybe you had to see it, but it's awful. It's the type of green screen where every set is a really bad miniature. Like when they're on the ice planet, it's like someone just dumped out a thing of table salt and then zoomed in really close on it. And they're like, hey, that looks like an ice planet. But really it looks like, just everybody's tiny walking around on a pile of salt. It's really bad. But the reason behind all these books and television shows and all that was not only to promote Photon as it took place, in the arena, but also Photon the home game, which came out right in time for Christmas of 1986. Now, at that same Christmas, we also see laser tag. Not the game, but the actual company, Laser Tag, who doesn't really have arenas, but they are marketing, their home game, which had guns and a vest or whatever. And the Photon had guns and then a base, like the tower in the arena, that you could shoot at, and then there was a advanced version that also had it came with a helmet, so it was pretty expensive, but anyway, so that was popular for a year. In fact, here's a commercial that I pulled down off of YouTube for the home version of Photon.
Prevailed, and the warriors who used it ruled. Photon, the ultimate laser battle game.
Your son has been chosen to be the ultimate laser warrior. First, choose the laser that really works together.
Scores on helmet, phasers, and module. When going into battle, don't get tagged. Choose Photon from Entertech.
So, like I said, in 1986, there's a big push for home version of Photon. If you can't get to an arena, there's only so many arenas, so there might not be one near you, but you could always pick up the home version. So 86, early 87, that's a big deal. So in this time frame in my life, Photon is pretty big. Like I said, my buddy and I, Jeff, were going. It wasn't far. The Oklahoma City Photon Arena was less than 10 miles from my house, so it was not a big deal to get our parents. Maybe Jeff's mom might take us, and my mom might pick us up later, but it wasn't a big deal to get rides to Photon, especially if we were going to stay for a long period of time. And so Jeff and I got pretty good at Photon. I mean, we weren't great, but we were really regular players, so and it was just a matter of learning the maze and learning, these tricks and all these things, but we got pretty good. So in the summer of, I believe, 1988, our family took a vacation to go visit relatives in Chicago, and my friend Jeff went with us. And when we got there, they were having a grand opening, and they had just opened a Photon Center. So we talked my parents into letting Jeff and I go play Photon there. So really what you have is a couple of kids, Jeff and I, that have been playing Photon for a couple of years now. And we showed up at a center where no one had played Photon. And so we were awesome. We were so much better than everybody. And at one point, and there were two referees, I remember, that were working there. And they accused us of cheating and all these things. And Jeff and I were like, no, we told them we were there on vacation, that we'd played Photon for a long time. And so at some point, these two people that worked there, and I'm like 15 years old, these people that worked there challenged us to a Photon battle, a 2-on-2 battle. Jeff and myself versus these two guys that worked there, who had been, playing inside the arena, while they were building it and before they were open. But Jeff and I slaughtered them. I mean, it was no match because we knew all these different things, and we knew where the times were in the soundtrack. We had plans. But, I mean, in the big picture of things, being really good at Photon one time because we had a bunch of more experience than people that were there is not a big accomplishment in life. But at the time, it seemed like a really big deal. I mean, people were treating us like we were awesome Photon Warriors that we were. Hello. But I'll never forget that because, I mean, for one, I don't know how long we were there, several hours, but we ruled the Chicago Photon. But, so anyway, Photon is this huge thing in my life. Jeff and I are going to Photon all the time. We're hanging out there on Saturdays, especially when they offered their Zappy Pass. And in 1989, Photon files bankruptcy. And all the arenas start to close down. And Oklahoma City, the Photon Arena, closed down. And it's hard for me I don't really have a good point of reference except for the fact that in August of 1989 is when I got my driver's license. And I don't remember ever driving to Photon. So, I mean, it had to be that summer or around that. I haven't been able to find an exact date, but it has to be really close to that time. Because I think if I could drive to Photon, I would have been there all the time. So I just don't remember that ever happening. And when my local Photon closed, I just remember being completely depressed. Like, I really thought this was something that was going to catch on. You know, like I said, I thought this was something that would always be in my life. And if you look at it, it was in my life for, you know, basically 4 years or maybe less, you know. And all the Photons closed down except for one for some reason. There is a place in Maryland that is called XP Laser Sport. XP stands for X Photon, and they still have, you know, the original Photon maze, and they have a retro night where you can play with the old Photon equipment. I've never been to Maryland, but that would definitely be a place to stop in. That would be on my list. But yeah, our Photon closed down. They boarded up the building. It was a unique shaped building anyway, and about a year later, it opened up as one of those fly-by-night discount furniture stores. And I remember I had my driver's license by this point, and I went there, and I went in, and salesmen were asking me if they could help me, and I said, no thanks, I'm just looking around. And I walked around what used to be Photon, and there were things that struck, you know, that there are things that you don't change about a building, like where the fire exits were, or you know, where the stairs that went upstairs, different things like that. So there were parts of it that hadn't changed, but you know, where the actual maze was or where we played were cheap bunk beds and old mattresses and things like that for sale. So but it was really weird to go in there, and I only went in one time, and then it burned down. The building burned down, and you know, I didn't have any attachment really to the buildings. I got to see it the one time after Photon closed down, and that was good enough. But yeah, it was just kind of odd. The building's not there anymore. They built something else on top of it, and that was that. As you know, there are modern laser tag arenas. You know, there's different brands. There's one that we went to, I took Mason to when he was 5 or 6, and I just didn't like the whole thing. You know, I think the equipment is probably better, but for some reason, and I'm sure it's probably just looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, you know, but I just prefer the old hardware. I mean, it was heavier, but to me it seemed more like, you know, an actual outer space thing, you know, putting on the helmet and all that stuff. And the new ones, most new places have either a vest or, you know, a chest pod thing like that, and the phaser, but, you know, they don't have the helmet and the other stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, the modern equipment I'm sure is 10 times better than what we used to play Photon with, but it's just not the same to me. Another thing that I liked about the old Photon was the whole theme of it being, you know, an outer space type battle or whatever. The Photon place or the laser tag place, near my house, has a combination laser tag / Egyptian theme. And inside the maze, there's a sarcophagus that will randomly shoot you, and there are hieroglyphics on the wall. And gone is the old dedicated Photon soundtrack. Now they just crank rock music in there. So it doesn't have the same atmosphere to me, you know. And a lot of the maze is, you know, just boards, plywood, and things that have been covered up or painted. It's just not the same, I don't think. Photon was really an experience. You know, it was more than just like a game or whatever. It was a whole ordeal. And I don't think at least the places I've been to, the modern laser tag things, it's just not the same to me. Really, this story could be over. There's no update in my story from 1989 until almost 20 years later. And, I've got on the internet and I found some other people that enjoyed Photon, and I downloaded these music tracks and things that you've talked about. But in 2008, there's this scuttlebutt on the internet that some crazy guy somewhere named Jim Strothers is building a new Photon arena. And he's building it off of the old plans. It's going to be Photon, and he's going to use the old equipment, and it's going to be the old arena, and it's going to be just like an old Photon. And I told myself, when I read that, I don't care where this is, I will go visit it at least once. I mean, anywhere in the country, I will go to where this is and see it. And it turns out that he was building it in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, which is just outside Tulsa, about 100 miles away from me. So I couldn't have been happier to hear this news, So Jim Strothers is posting updates about how it's going, and there's a lot of technical updates of he's got this working or that working, Then there's some radio silence where we don't hear updates for a while. But, I'm getting pretty excited about reading about this. And then there's a post, an update, that basically says that due to financial reasons, the arena will not open. And this was just, we were so close to having a Photon arena again, like reliving your youth and all this stuff. I was really upset. And then Jim posted and said in May of 2008, the arena would not open for business, and he was going to open it for free play for 1 day for anyone who was interested. And as many of my life adventures go, I called Jeff. He said he was in. We loaded up and drove to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma to go play Photon. And when we got there, I would say that the Photon Center the arena looked really good. Now, the rest of the building was largely unfinished. I mean, there's a giant foyer type area that was just empty. I mean, it looked even larger than it was because there was nothing in it. I remember there's a sign on the wall that said arcade, and I mean, it must have been on a wall that was, 75 yards long, it seemed like, and there's one arcade game on the wall. It was Gyrus. I think there may have been some pinball machines too, but so it was just almost cavernous, the size of this room. And Jim was there with his wife and some of the people that had helped out, and there were people had come, driven 8-12 hours. But I guess what kind of put everything in perspective for me is there were a dozen people, maybe. Definitely less than 20 altogether who showed up for this. And I would have gone anywhere to see this. Anywhere in the country. So I was amazed that only, less than 20 people showed up to relive this. So maybe it wasn't as big of a deal as I had, to other people as it was to me. Because it was sure a big deal to me. But we played Photon. For the first time in 20 years, I played honest-to-God Photon. We strapped on the battery belts. We put on that old equipment, and I got choked up. I know it seems silly, but it's just like something from your past, from your childhood, that is gone and gone forever. And this was the one day, 20 years later, to go back and see what it was like. It was really incredible. It was a great experience. And at the end of the day, Jim started talking about, selling off some of the equipment. And I had offered to buy, some of the pods, maybe a non-working pod or something. We had talked about that. He and I talked about that in an email before I went. And then when I got there, he said that there may be a chance of it opening after all. So he didn't want to sell anything off, which I I would rather have a functioning Photon Center than, a game pod that I can't use hanging in a corner of my room. So I wasn't disappointed about that at all. And so work continued. Now, I will tell you this. The day that we played, there were technical problems. I mean, not all of the guns were registering right. There were just some issues. Not everything was tuned properly, but, for what it was still exciting to play. So that Photon Center did open. It opened on July 1st of 2008. But before you pack your bags and get ready to head to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, I will let you know that it closed 9 weeks later. And, I kind of kicked myself for this, but it's like a lot of things. And I've done this before, where there's something where you're like, I wish there were a Photon. Like, for 20 years, there's no Photon. And finally, some guy opens a Photon, and then you go, I'll get out there eventually. I didn't make it out there. 9 weeks. I mean, in my defense, I thought it would be open longer than 2 months, but I didn't make it out there. I didn't support the guy, and he didn't make it. I mean, he made it. He's alive. But the Photon Center didn't make it. It's closed up. And, I've mentioned in my book and on some of my podcasts, there's a local arcade. There's one, Cactus Jack's, which is still a really large, independently owned family video game arcade. And every now and then, I brag about it. Online, I brag about Cactus Jack's all the time, and people say, there's no more arcades, and I say, I have one around the corner from my house. But I don't go there that often. So it's like, I support the idea of them having an arcade, but I don't support them financially. And sometimes, I'll take my son, and we'll go there, and I'll spend $10 or whatever. I don't even feel like I'm doing it because I want to play arcade games, but I'm doing it because I want to support them. In what they're doing, So I don't know. I kind of feel bad that I didn't make it to the Photon because I made it, the one time, but not while they were open. And I don't know. I wish it would have made it because I think, it was really something special. It was a lot different than just the regular old laser tag that they have out there today, So anyway, we're getting to the end of this one. There is no more Photon. I will tell you this, as playing Photon as a 36-year-old overweight white male, I don't run as much as I used to. I will tell you that. Yes, I do not run like I used to 20 years ago. I remember, like I said, making these plans of we're going to run here, and then we're going to run here. And when I played at Jim Strothers Field, my plan was to sit and wait for people to run by me, and then I would shoot them and hide, and try not to pass out. So different strategy 20 years later, and many pounds later. So a couple of things I want to plug real quick before the end of this podcast. The first is a really interesting, really good documentary called Light Sport. And it's called Light Sport, The People, Business, and Game of Laser Tag. And I own this documentary. It's about an hour and a half long. And it's all about, it covers Photon. A lot of it talks about Photon, and then it talks more just about the sport of laser tag in general. The URL for that, and I'll put this in the podcast posting, is lasertagvideo.com. Now, I'll tell you one thing. The video, as I just click on it here, the video is $20 and only available on VHS. It's copyright 2002, and I don't know why it's not available on DVD. In fact, I took my VHS copy and converted it to DVD, just so I could watch it, because the only thing I do with VHS tapes at this point is convert them to DVD if I want to watch them. But yeah, so that's the only bad part about it, but it is a good documentary. So if you're interested in more about the story of Photon and seeing the There's some footage in the documentary of 8XP Laser Sport, people still playing Photon. So, you know, if you're interested in Photon, the history of laser tag, all that kind of stuff, it's definitely worth picking up. Let's see. Is there anything else that I wanted to plug? When I went to Jim Strothers' Photon Arena, I took along with me both a digital still camera and my camcorder. And I recorded 3 different games of Photon. I think we played 3 or 4 games that day. And so I recorded each game. I also took some footage. Most of the footage was from above looking down at people playing, but I also walked around on the game field while people were playing and took some footage from there. All those videos are on YouTube. And so I'll add links. If you just go to youtube.com/Rob O'Hara and look around, you can find my Photon videos, or I'll add a link to the podcast thing. And also I'll add a link. I took, a couple hundred pictures that day of the arena, the equipment, what everything looked like. So, if you're more interested in seeing, what Photon looked like in the equipment, you can do that. So, but that basically wraps up episode 112. It's all about Photon. It was a good memory. I miss it in the way that I miss a lot of things from my youth. If they open a Photon Center next to me, basically they did. Last year I went one time, so I don't know that I would, be the Photon Warrior I once was, but what can you do? Episode 113, which is already about half written, is going to be about text adventures. We're going to talk about Jason Scott's new documentary, Get Lamp, which is all about text adventures and some of my old text adventure stories. And 114, which is on the table right now, is going to be into arcade games. I've had a few people ask me about arcade auctions, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about auctions and some of my old stories about buying and selling games at auctions, and some tips, things, information, things for you to look out for, stuff like that. So anyway, this wraps up 112. Thank you guys once again for listening. You can find all the podcasts at podcast.robohara.com. The forum, thank you everybody who posts, hangs out at the forum, which is thegaschamber.robohara.com. And links to all those things and lots of other things can be found right at the regular website, which is www.robohara.com. So thanks again for listening, for posting, for sharing, everything that you guys do. I really appreciate it. This is Flack, and I will see you in episode 113.
Congratulations, Photon Warriors. You have successfully completed your strategic maneuvers. Disperse to exit. Disperse to exit. Disperse to exit. Disperse to exit. Disperse to exit.